Okay, so let's talk about entering this virtual choir rehearsal. There are some things that you need to consider first and foremost. That is, how are you going to communicate with your students and with the parents and guardians for this? Before they almost even enter the classroom, they need to know how to get there. And that is going to come from communication with you. Now, hopefully you already have some sort of communication method set up, whether it's emails, texts, messaging, app device things, or social media, your website, etc. I really encourage you to, even if you've used a multitude of platforms to communicate with your students and guardians during this time, that you try to lessen the number of platforms that you are communicating with everyone and really keep it simple and identify what the most used and most accessible platform for you to communicate with them is, and pick that one or two options, right? So if it was me, I would choose email, and I would choose a website, right? Like that email is going to go directly to inboxes, and students can also set up email inboxes. And then I would deliver all of the content with how I expect them to show up for a class in a website, and I could also link it in the email. Now, I also had things set up to where I had student leaders that ran messaging apps to all of the students and said, oh, go check an email, or here's a link for that. That is what worked for me and my students. I encourage you to think about what works for you and your students and guardians, right? That's the tricky thing here. You've also got to be communicating with guardians, not necessarily because they want to know, although I know some do want to know, but you want to make it apparent from the very beginning, no pun intended, that you have been communicating with students what your expectations are during this period of virtual learning. And so that includes documentation for guardians of outlining your expectations. So first thing, consider how you're going to communicate with them. Secondly, I want you to think about how are you going to show up for them and show them that you're here for them? How are you going to greet them? I think it's really important to not make your instructions synchronous, meaning it has to be done all at the same time. So you're not saying okay, third period choir, we're going to meet at 11:15 just like normal, because you don't know with them being home what other types of things they have going on that keep them from meeting at 11:15. This is probably going to be one of the biggest challenges for us to think about as choir conductors and educators, is the fact that we're so used to synchronous learning, or learning happening at the same time. But the key to virtual learning is that it needs to be asynchronous. And I'm not saying that everything needs to be asynchronous, but you really need to be intentional about the fact that a lot of it, if not the vast majority of it, needs to be asynchronous. And so being mindful of that. So now that you have communicated with students and parents what's expected of them, where they're going to show up to find the assignments and the things that you have for them to continue their learning, you also want to, again, make sure that you are showing them that you are there for them. And so many times in a choir classroom, we do things unrelated to the music to show students we care. Whether it's when they walk in the door, giving them a hug or a high five or a compliment, anything like that. Sometimes we play even get to know you games, or there's so many different options. And again, it's different for every choir, but I really, 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 that's a lot of reallys, want to impress upon you how you begin to think about, how am I going to show up for my students to let them know that I care? All right, so that's the first little bit, and now you are on to the next section, tips, ideas, and implementations for how to do so.